This is Halloween at Gröna Lund, an awesome boardwalk amusement park in Stockholm. Let's dive into the history of Halloween in Sweden and let me show you all the spooky stuff you can find here. The first year that Halloween was celebrated at this park, Gröna Lund, was in 2017. 85,000 people visited this park that year, and that number grew to 140,000 in 2021. How many people will visit in 2022? I think it's safe to say that it's gonna be a new record. During Halloween, this amusement park is transformed into a nightmarish place of horrors. Zombies, clowns and freaky creatures of all kinds can be seen here, especially if you go into the House of Mirrors. For some reason, they've introduced a New York-inspired block party area this year. I don't really see the connection. Maybe they're thinking that Halloween is an American tradition, so let's bring part of America to Sweden. Maybe. Twice per day you can see a ghoulish parade of creatures of the night walking through the park. In reality, it's mostly poorly paid youngsters who are forced to dress up and perform, but I think they're having fun at least. And of course, there's a bunch of House of Horrors as well. Skeppet, the ship, has the worst name ever, but it looks really cool. A bit of oriental horror in the cold north. There's also a zombie zone with, zombies. Aren't zombies getting a bit old? It's not really my favorite type of creature. You can also go into the regular old House of Horrors, which they, creatively enough, has renamed into the House of Even More Horrors during Halloween. The names are pretty bad in general. They also have an attraction where a cult is performing mysterious sacrifices. Can you guess what that one is called? The Cult. The theming is getting better every year, and I really like some of the attractions, but I think they should fire the PR guy in charge of naming all the attractions. In the US, it's common to have Halloween celebrations at amusement parks and other locations, but it hasn't been all that common in Sweden. Liseberg is a big amusement park in Gothenburg, and they've had a Halloween celebration since 2015. And Kolmården Zoo has celebrated Halloween since 2019, so as you can see, it's a pretty new thing for us Swedes. Why is that? To answer that, let's start at the beginning. Let's go back thousands of years to the origins of Halloween.
Vad håller du på med? Vad är du för någonting?
Samhain was an ancient Celtic festival celebrated on October 31st in Ireland and Scotland. That day marks the end of the summer harvest and the beginning of winter. If they had been in Sweden, it would have been in September instead. By October, it's freezing cold here. We live in Mordor. Samhain was also a festival where the Celtic druids could make predictions for the future. And that's because it was a time when the ghosts of the departed returned to Earth. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? October 31st, ghosts and spirits. It's almost the same as Halloween, isn't it? Well, not quite. The Romans came and mixed things up a bit. In the year 43 AD, Rome had conquered most of the Celtic lands, and they ruled them for the next 400 years. During that time, the festival of Samhain was combined with the Roman festival of Feralia and the celebration of Pomona. Feralia took place at the end of October, and it was a day of remembrance for the dead. Pomona was the goddess of fruits and trees, and I couldn't really find any good reason why this was combined with Samhain, except for the date. The symbol of Pomona was an apple, and some believe that the tradition of bobbing for apples on Halloween comes from this celebration of Pomona. However, bobbing for apples isn't really something we do here in Sweden, and that's just one of the differences between Halloween in Sweden and other countries. Just like the Romans took over Samhain, Christianity took over the Roman celebrations and transformed them into Halloween. The word Halloween comes from All Hallows Eve, and incidentally, there's a holiday in Sweden called All Hallows Day, but those are not the same. Since early Christianity, there's been a celebration for martyrs and the dead at the start of November. But the actual practices have changed throughout the centuries and between countries. Christianity is also divided into Protestantism and Catholicism, which doesn't exactly make things simpler. Long story short, the Swedish All Hallows Day is a somber Protestant holiday where you light candles on loved ones' graves. In contrast, Halloween, as it's known in the US, comes from Irish Catholics who migrated to America and brought with them their version of All Hallows Eve. Halloween is a much more lively holiday, with pumpkins and decorations and parties and candy as well. Seeing all of these Halloween decorations in Sweden still feels a bit new and strange. In the late 90s, Halloween started to be celebrated in Sweden, but to a very small degree. American movies was the biggest influence for a rise in popularity after that. Trick-or-treating seemed like such a fun and exotic thing to do, and everyone likes dressing up, right? The popularity of Halloween in Sweden grew even more in the early 2000s, and it's becoming more and more popular every year. For a long time, it was just a holiday for kids though. Trick-or-treating has been Swedishified into bus eller godis, literally prank or candy. But the prank part is pretty downplayed in Sweden. I don't think you'll see many kids in Sweden doing pranks if you don't give them candy. All you'll see is a very sad and disappointed face. Trick-or-treating is a long way from being as popular in Sweden as in the US, but who knows how things will change in the coming decades. For adults, Halloween is still not a very big thing in Sweden. In the US, Halloween parties and trick-or-treating became a big thing between 1920 and 1950. It's estimated that these days people spend more than $6 billion every year on Halloween. In Sweden, yeah, not that much. There are some big Halloween parties and you might see people dress up, but it's not a huge holiday over here. It's still growing though. We've just had a couple of decades of Halloween and new traditions take time to become popular. But I hope that we won't forget the Swedish All Hallows Day just because we start indulging in the American version of Halloween. Lighting a candle on your loved one's graves is a small and simple gesture, and I think we have time in our lives for both Halloween parties and for remembering the dead in a more quiet way. To round things off on a happy note, I found some interesting Halloween facts that I'd like to share. Carved pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns, were originally not made out of pumpkins, they were made out of turnips. The name jack-o'-lantern is believed to either come from will-o'-the-wisps, mysterious lights that could be seen over peat bogs, or from the legend of Stingy Jack. Stingy Jack was a drunkard who made a deal with the devil, and he was forced to wander the earth with only a turnip lantern to light his way. Also, I mentioned that the Celtic Druids predicted the future during Samhain, and that tradition continued into Halloween as well. In Ireland and Scotland, there were tons of rituals for young women to predict who they were gonna marry. One ritual was to give different names of lovers to hazelnuts and throw those nuts in the fire to see which ones burst and which ones burn to ash. I'm not exactly sure which of those two is the good one. Another ritual was for women to eat a mix of sugar, walnuts, hazelnuts, and nutmeg, and then they dream of their future husband. There were a lot more of these rituals, and just about all of them concerned young women who wanted to get married. I have a slight suspicion that the men mostly focused on getting drunk instead. And there you have it. That was a very quick look at Halloween at Gröna Lund and at Halloween in Sweden in general. I hope you found it interesting. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day. Just like the Romans took over some... been Swedishified into fun. Just like the...